Zane Mitchell revved his custom Kawasaki Ninja, the screaming engine echoing between the tired buildings of Millerville at 2:37 a.m. He downshifted unnecessarily, causing the engine to backfire with a sound like a gunshot. Lights flickered on in windows. Being 23 with no real prospects beyond a part-time job at AutoZone meant taking power where you could find it. A police cruiser pulled out from a side street, lights flashing. Officer Reynolds again. Zane noticed his right taillight was out, actual cause for a ticket. Shit, he muttered, pulling over into the empty parking lot of Donnie's Hardware. After receiving a fix-it ticket, Zane headed toward the outskirts of town. With nothing better to do, he decided to check out an old Airstream trailer with a separate shed that locals said belonged to a cranky veteran who'd supposedly owned a vintage motorcycle. The Airstream sat back from the county road, its aluminum skin gleaming dully in the moonlight. Beyond it stood a large shed with padlocked doors. Zane approached cautiously. "You planning to rob me, or just trespassing for fun?" The voice came from behind him. Standing at the corner of the shed was an old man holding a shotgun with the casual comfort of someone who'd handled firearms his entire life. "Neither, sir," Zane said, raising his hand slightly. "I was just curious." "I'm Frank Daly." "This is private property," the old man said, gesturing with the shotgun toward Zane's motorcycle. "That Japanese rice rocket yours?" "Yes, sir, Kawasaki. Ninja. I modified it myself," Frank snorted. "Modified it to wake up the whole county." After a brief exchange, Zane mentioned the rumor about Frank's motorcycle. Something shifted in Frank's expression. A flicker of interest, quickly suppressed. Minutes later, Frank unlocked the shed door and flipped on the lights. Dominating the center of the space, covered by a canvas tarp, was an unmistakable motorcycle-shaped object. With a swift motion, Frank pulled the tarp away. It was a Harley-Davidson WLA, the legendary military motorcycle from World War II. Its olive-drab paint was faded, chrome parts dulled with age and spotted with rust. But even in its decrepit state, the machine exuded a presence that commanded attention. 1942. Harley-Davidson WLA, Frank said, voice softening with reverence. "The Liberator. She carried me through 2 tours in Korea." "Why is it sitting here? Why not restore it?" "She's been sitting here since '97. My hands got too arthritic to work the controls properly." He flexed his fingers, joints visibly swollen. "Doctor said I shouldn't ride anymore." Frank invited Zane in for coffee. The interior of his trailer was compact but immaculately organized. The walls were decorated with framed photographs of young men in Marine Corps uniforms and medals in shadow boxes. One photo stood out. Frank, much younger, standing beside another Marine next to a Harley WLA. Both men were grinning broadly, arms around each other's shoulders. "That's Johnny Mercer," Frank said. "Meanest son of a bitch in the 1st Marine Division, and the best friend I ever had." Frank explained how they'd served together in Korea and Vietnam. Johnny didn't make it home from the 2nd tour. Stepped on a mine outside Da Nang, April 17, 1965. "We made a pact," Frank continued. "If one of us didn't make it back, the other would visit the memorial every year on the anniversary. For 52 years, I've ridden to Spring Hill Veterans Cemetery to visit the memorial wall where his name is carved. But not anymore. Doctor took my license 6 months ago. Said my reaction time's too slow." Frank took a long swallow of coffee. "It's just me now." Zane considered for a moment. "I could take you. We could get your Harley running again. I could ride it, you could ride passenger." Frank stared at him like he'd suggested flying to the moon. "You? Ride my Harley?" "So teach me," Zane said simply. "Why would you do this?" "You don't know me." Zane thought about it. "Because that bike deserves to run, and because promises should be kept." The next 10 days passed in a flurry of activity. Frank proved to be a demanding taskmaster, insisting on methodical, thorough work on the Harley. They drained the old fuel, cleaned the tank, rebuilt the carburetor, replaced the spark plugs and wiring. By the 5th day, they had the engine running, rough at first, but Zane tuned it until it purred with a deep, authoritative rumble that made the Kawasaki's high-pitched whine seem childish by comparison. "Now you learn to ride it," Frank announced, "and not on public roads until I say you're ready." Frank instructed Zane in the art of handling the vintage motorcycle on his 5 acres of open field behind the trailer. "It's not about speed," Frank explained. "It's about control, anticipation, feeling the machine work with you, not just under you." By the 9th day, Frank deemed Zane proficient enough to try riding with a passenger. Their first attempt was nearly disastrous. Frank's weight changed the bike's center of gravity dramatically, and Zane almost dumped them both in the first turn. "Balance," Frank shouted. "Feel the weight shift and compensate." That night, Frank handed Zane a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a leather motorcycle jacket with a Marine Corps emblem stitched on the back. "It was Johnny's," Frank explained, his voice unnaturally even. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Frank was already outside, dressed in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt with a Marine Corps windbreaker. The Harley started on the second kick, its deep rumble shattering the pre-dawn silence. Their progress was deliberate but steady. The Harley cruised comfortably at 55 mph on the highway. They stopped every hour or so to rest, Frank's aged body not designed for long periods on a motorcycle anymore. During these breaks, Frank would share stories about his time in the service, about Johnny, about rides they'd taken. By midday, they'd covered nearly 150 miles. Frank directed them to a modest farmhouse where an old friend lived, Jim Corrigan, who had served with them in Korea. "Frank Daly, you old dog," Jim called out. "When you called, I didn't believe you'd actually make it." Inside, they were treated to a home-cooked meal and easy camaraderie. As they prepared to leave, Jim handed Frank a small wooden box. "Johnny's lighter from Da Nang, the one with the dragon engraving. Thought it should be with him." They continued their journey, stopping twice more at the homes of Frank's old comrades. Each welcomed them warmly, each contributed some small token for Johnny, a photograph, a medal, a letter sealed in an envelope. By evening, they'd covered nearly 250 miles. Frank directed them to a small motel just off the highway. As they settled, Zane noticed Frank moving more stiffly, wincing occasionally. "You okay?" Zane asked. "Just old," Frank replied dismissively. But as he reached for his duffel, a prescription bottle tumbled out. Zane read the label, oxycodone, for pain management. "Cancer or something else?" Zane asked directly. For a moment, Frank seemed ready to deny it. Then his shoulders sagged. "Pancreatic," he said simply. "Stage 4, diagnosed 3 months ago. That's why this trip was so important. It's your last one?" Frank nodded once. "Doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. I made a promise to Johnny. 52 years I've kept it. Wasn't about to stop now just because some cells decided to mutiny." The next morning they set out before dawn. As the sun climbed higher, a sign appeared. "Spring Hill Veteran Cemetery, 5 miles." At a roadside stop, Frank changed into a carefully folded Marine Corps dress uniform. With Zane's help, he secured the medals and ribbons that adorned it. When complete, Frank looked every inch the Marine age and illness momentarily banished by the power of the cloth and what it represented. The cemetery stretched before them, white markers in perfect alignment across rolling green hills. Frank guided them to a parking area near a black granite wall inscribed with names. "The memorial's just ahead," Frank said as they dismounted. "I need to walk the rest of the way." Tradition. They walked slowly, Frank's posture military straight despite the visible effort it cost him. Finally, they stood before the wall, a panel of polished black granite bearing dozens of names in precise white lettering. Frank's eyes found one immediately: John A. Mercer, CPL, USMC, 1940-1965. "Hey, Johnny," Frank said softly. "Made it another year." From his pocket, he withdrew a silver star medal, its surface gleaming in the morning sun. With reverent care, he placed it at the base of the wall, directly beneath Johnny's name. "He earned this," Frank said, voice barely above a whisper. Saved our entire squad during an ambush near the Cambodian border. Command awarded it posthumously. I've been its caretaker all these years. One by one, Frank added the items collected during their journey. The lighter in its wooden box, the photograph, the letter, the medal. Each was placed with careful precision. He was the hero, Frank said, voice suddenly stronger. I just survived. As Frank straightened, his body suddenly stiffened, a spasm of pain contorting his features. He staggered slightly and Zane moved quickly to support him. I'm fine, Frank insisted, though his pallor and shallow breathing suggested otherwise. Just need a moment. They stayed at the memorial for nearly an hour before beginning the return journey, but as the miles accumulated, Zane could feel Frank's posture deteriorating, his grip on Zane's shoulders becoming weaker. At a gas station, Frank emerged from the restroom with blood on his lips, hastily wiped away. His complexion had taken on a grayish cast. We need to get you to a hospital, Zane insisted. No, Frank replied with unexpected vehemence. No hospitals. We keep going. I want to go home. Against his better judgment, Zane agreed to continue. Frank's strength ebbed visibly as the day waned. What had started as occasional tremors became constant shaking. His breathing grew labored, rattling ominously in his chest. The sun was setting when they finally turned onto the dirt road leading to Frank's property. But as they approached the final stretch, Frank suddenly slumped against Zane's back, his grip failing entirely. Zane accelerated, desperate to reach the trailer. He brought the Harley to a skidding halt and carefully lowered Frank to the ground. Frank! Zane shouted. Frank, hold on! Blood bubbled at the corner of Frank's mouth, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His eyes, however, were clear and focused on Zane's face. Made it, he whispered. Home. Inside the trailer, Frank directed Zane to papers in his desk, the title, and registration for the Harley-Davidson WLA, signed over to Zane along with a handwritten letter. You knew, Zane said. You planned this. A ghost of a smile touched Frank's bloodless lips. Needed someone who'd understand. His breathing hitched. One more thing. In the shed. Under the floorboard. By the workbench. Something for you to take in next year. His eyes drifted to the photographs on the wall, focusing on something or someone. Only he could see. Hey, Johnny, he murmured. Told you I'd make it. His voice trailed off as his chest rose once more, then fell still. 1 year later, a gleaming Harley-Davidson WLA rumbled through the gates of Spring Hill Veterans Cemetery. Zane had restored it to showroom condition, spending every spare dollar on authentic parts. At the memorial wall, he placed items at the base of Johnny's name, including photographs of Frank's military funeral and a small vial containing some of Frank's ashes. As he turned to leave, an elderly man in a wheelchair called out to him, That's Frank Daly's bike. Zane stopped. Yes, sir, it is. Did you know him? Served with him in '67 after Johnny was gone. The old Marine extended a gnarled hand. Robert Walsh. They called me Doc back then. You coming back next year? Doc asked. Zane nodded without hesitation. Yes, sir. Every year. Doc's eyes crinkled. Maybe I'll see you then. Got some stories about Frank you might want to hear. And maybe something for Johnny, if that's still the tradition. It is, Zane confirmed. The tradition stands. What Zane Mitchell never told anyone, what no one else would ever know, was that the silver star he'd found beneath Frank's floorboard wasn't Frank's at all. There had never been a matching medal. Frank had only received a Purple Heart and Johnny the Silver Star. The medal Frank had kept all those years was actually Johnny's original. The one at the memorial was a replica Frank had specially made. For 52 years, Frank had carried his fallen friend's highest honor, unable to part with this final connection to the man who had saved his life at the cost of his own. Only in his final year, knowing his own end was near, had Frank finally found the strength to return it to its rightful owner. And in that same moment of closure, he had created a new beginning, a legacy that would outlive them both. The motorcycle rumbled loud beneath Zane as he hit the open highway, but the memories it carried, of friendship, sacrifice, and promises kept, thundered even louder.